Well, it's great to be here. I haven't been back to the voting village since 2019, and nothing at all has happened since then. All right, so keynote panel today, timely as ever for voting village issues, but this one in particular, right around the corner we have 2024, and it's kind of like the global year of federal or national elections. Yes, the US has an election, but in addition to that, we have Mexico, Egypt, Taiwan, that might be interesting, India, Moldova, which has had a little bit of friction lately with Russia, and oh yeah, Russia has an election too. So what we're going to do today is with our panelists is we're going to cover a global perspective on elections, the various threats that we see, and then what are some of the solutions or things we need to keep an eye out for. So this is not just going to be a technical conversation, because as we've seen over the last several years, threats to election are not just technical in nature. We also have, of course, the continuing and growing problem of information disorder, information decay. And so we'll jump into that. All right, so we'll go on for 30, 40 minutes here, and then we'll open up for some questions that I will hope are respectful. We'll see how that goes. You're always respectful here at the Voting Village, so we'll be good. All right, Maia, let's start with you. You spent a lot of time in Europe lately looking at the impact of disinformation on democracy and electoral processes. Understanding that the group here may be US biased, but we obviously have various perspectives here. Can you give us your view on threats to elections in Europe?
Sure, I think it's a pleasure being here. I have a question, like who's from Europe in here? Raise up.
Here we go.
Great. So we know that we share the same concerns, and indeed 2024 it's a big one, and we also have the European elections. So it's going to be fun, and also Belarus is on the elections, and I'm coming from Poland, so we're actually starting earlier, and we have the parliamentary elections coming up just on the 15th of October. And I think that, like, what is the difference that you need to understand in between European and the US elections is that we rather don't have e-voting, right? The only country in Europe that has it is Estonia. And there were a few trials and checkups for other countries, but it's not happening. It's like one of the concerns that you are having is not really our concern. But how I'm looking on this information, how we work with it in Alliance for Europe, we're seeing disinformation being spread by the Operation Influence of Russia, but also internal actors to actually change the attitudes of peoples. And that's how the new technologies are being deployed as well. And what we're doing right now in Poland, for example, before the elections, we're setting up the ISAC, Information Sharing Analysis Center, to actually research that more and look at it more. And because also, it's a huge crowd in here of cybersecurity experts. In the EU, in most of the countries, there's not that many experts on this matter. And I think there's a need for more awareness as well, because Poland is bordering country with Ukraine. Last year we got around 10% of our society fleeing from Ukraine, right? So basically we're a country of 40 million, 37, like more than 4 million Ukrainians are right now in Poland. And those are the narratives that are being deployed by the bad actors as well. And it's super easy in disinformation to use, for example, us versus them narrative, and just polarizing us, and I think there's a big issue in US as well. And those are the biggest concerns of looking at the elections in the EU and also of the governments, because something that you have in US, it's still trust in the democracy in many countries in the EU, or few countries in the EU, including mine. Sometimes this democracy or the rule of law is being targeted by also populistic governments. And that's a challenge.
So your takeaway is that because technology is not as prevalent in European elections, save for Estonia, which, sidebar here, President Ilves would give me grief every now and then when we were talking about some of the issues we had post-2016 here in the US, the Russians going after voter registration databases, and he was constantly saying, you just need to go to mobile voting, you just need to go to mobile voting, and I'm trying to see Matt in the back, there he is. Yeah, and then a year after that he first really pushed me on that, they had their issues with their national ID database and the compromise of that system. So I think it shows that even with those more advanced technologies that are in play in Estonia, that they obviously have some challenges as well. Also want to highlight, though we're not talking about the EU anymore, the UK recently with their database breach, which I don't know if you want to comment on that at all, but I think we're still kind of waiting for the other shoe to drop there and who that threat actor might be, and really what was the risk.
Yeah, if you look actually what was happening since 2015, because I would say not 2016 was a year, but in 2015 I was working for the previous president of Poland, and that was the first time when I kind of looked at disinformation targeted the elections, because there was a year also of the big migration crisis. And those are the deploys and how Russia, especially in EU, but also other countries, are really getting into the system. And the election integrity right now is not only happening during the elections itself, election days of voting is not only happening during the campaign, but it's actually happening during the whole electoral cycle. And that's a big threat, and that's also the terms with the UK, right? That if you look at what happened with the UK, for example, with the Brexit, we're seeing very similar processes happening right now in Poland or even in Germany. Like there are different people coming over, and very, very often the voting is being built of what you believe in, what you trust. And if you don't trust your state, your country, your government, or if you just don't trust other people that are out there, that's when it's the wrong thing is happening, right? And we are having a lot of darknet research that we're doing as well. And there are narratives deployed, for example, in Poland, saying that Ukrainians will take over Poland, and that was pretty much happening in UK as well, saying that the migrants from the other EU countries, including Poles, were taking over UK, and there was no specific cybersecurity measures as well on it.
So I want to come back to the threat actor piece in a minute, but what we've already talked a lot about today is Russia as the influence actor, and I kind of see Russia is the Leroy Jenkins of election interference and election influence. They're very noisy, very corruptive. On the other hand, I think we're seeing an emergence of China in this space, particularly what happened last year, at least what was announced earlier this year and last year, with Chinese government officials bribing and paying off Canadian provincial officials. And I think we're going to see more of that. I think we see a good chunk of that here in the United States at the local level, like not quite at the dog catcher races, but local commission. We are seeing influence there. And I am interested in, having talked to some French officials, what that level of corruption and disinformation and influence the Chinese actors are copying, and I've heard some of the French intelligence officials call it the Russification of Chinese influence operations. So we'll come back to that in just a minute. All right, Kendall, so you have spent some time working with the Germans and over there, and the Germans, I think this year have 4 of the 16 federal states have their elections. So why don't you tell us a little bit about what you see in Germany, because whether they're the bellwether, I think France tends to be kind of the European bellwether for European influence, but we have seen activity in and around Germany. And so talk to us a little bit about what you're seeing there and how some of the social issues come to play, national identity, and how that manifests in information influence operations.
Yeah, thanks so much. I mean, we're seeing some of the same issues that I think we've been talking about here today, the biggest one being disinformation. One of the fascinating kind of discoveries that I, in my discussions with them this year, kind of stumbled upon was, electronic voting is largely unconstitutional there. And reason being because they found that because you cannot, in their opinion, have meaningful discussions and meaningful public scrutiny on the validity of electronic voting, they've made it unconstitutional, right? So they really do rely on a paper-based system, which is great. We love that, but it also changes how targeted the disinformation is, right? So here, what we're seeing in terms of threat, it's not so much on the voting machines, right? Because we don't really have them. It's more on the mechanisms used to make public political figures' viewpoints. So online campaigning, that type of thing, and those are really the kind of the foundational systems that we're seeing that are actually being targeted in terms of the threat. So doing things like infiltrating a campaign's website, changing the information that is there, flooding the actual discussion processes in terms of just overloading the system. We're seeing things like that, and when we start talking about what that does for national identity, one of the discussions that we spent a lot of time on was just sort of Germany's approach to having that national identity, and what does it mean to be patriotic and be German, right? Given Germany's past, a lot of individuals there really struggle with that. One of the questions we ask is whether or not they feel like they want to identify more as being German citizens versus identifying more as being members of the EU. And a lot of that fluctuates depending on what's going on in the time. But something that I believe that they're really working earnestly on is trying to strike that balance of how to develop that level of patriotism and pro-German viewpoint without really feeling like you still have to step on eggshells, right? I think that's very difficult for a nation, and I also think that it heavily impacts young people in the sense of how they decide to go about getting involved in the political process, right? If it's hard to be patriotic, if it's hard to really be pro-Germany, what do you tell your kids, right? How do you motivate the younger generation to really step up to the plate and fight for what they believe in? And I think that's sort of what we're going to see play out over the next couple years, is sort of how disinformation is being targeted towards not just younger people, but the individuals running for office and the issues that they really stand for. And so I'd like to see how that ends up playing out over the next couple years. And just, again, when we talk about the technology used, one of the things we have to remember is Germany is very risk averse. Compared to the United States, they are risk first, innovation second. Whereas obviously here in the States, it's very innovation focused, risk second. And I think they struggle very much with striking that balance. One of the conversations we have when we were at the German Bundestag was, they still use fax machines, right? And so phasing those type of systems out in a meaningful way that encourages those individuals to have discussions and still feel safe and build upon some of the values that they find important, I think is going to be a part of that ongoing national discussion. And then under that, how do you situate yourself within that framework, as members of the European Union?
Can I just step in on the patriotic
I encourage
spot?
that, in fact.
Thank you, perfect. On the patriotic side, I loved actually how Kat came in here and said you're here, you're patriots, and you're here to support your country, right? That's something that would never happen in Europe. And that's a challenge that we're having, and I guess that quite a lot of things that happened in Europe already might happen in here as well. Because what happened with the patriotism is that far right took this for themselves. Right? And that's why the Stratcom and the counter narratives are super important as well. If we look at the information space, it's basically floated by disinformation. It's basically put with those narratives, and we are just counterfeit it. We are just reacting to it. And we need to bring those narratives. And we are patriots. I'm Polish and I'm patriot, but I'm not the far right,
So I'm going to come back to some of those solutions in a minute, but let's pull it back here to the United States. Bryson, in addition to being a unicorn, you have also been advising CISA and other folks for several years on election security issues. So, we obviously have a more complicated, technologically integrated system of elections here. We are not Estonia, but we do use machines for casting, counting of votes. So can you talk to us a little bit about what you see on the edge of the 2024 election? What are those threats that you're seeing, you're worried about, and how do you think these things are going to play out?
So it's Bryson and 3 lawyers. I think I represent the average voter. 90% of what I would say, Matt much better phrased it up front as part of the introduction to the voting village. So I highly encourage you to continue to reference that, because I will do a poor imitation at best. One of the first things that when I was working with Chris back in 2020 was I saw the issue of, there's 2 aspects here, right? There's attacking the tech, and then there's attacking the people. And the two go together. And one of the first things that I saw as a challenge for us is we knew in 2020 paper ballots were going to be more of what was going to be a part of that process. And what we didn't know is how long that was going to take. You might be surprised, Americans do not have a long attention span. Therefore, we need results to come in quickly, and that's a system that is not going to guarantee quick results. So what, right? At the end of the day, we're more confident we're going to be secure. However, because of that attention span, that leaves an opportunity for a narrative to be constructed. That is a void that could be filled. And so my view is since 2016, the US government had been doing a lot of work on this. Now, it's first thing worth noting, here in the United States, the federal government does not directly run elections. There are around 9,000 jurisdictions, all at the community level, run by a 75-year-old grandmother named Eleanor. That's who runs your elections.
Can I jump in real quick?
You absolutely can.
All right. Who do we have here that's a state or local election official? I know some of the Maricopa guys are here. All right. Let's give them a round of applause for. So the hell these folks have been through over the last several years is absolutely unpatriotic.
Yep.
And my concern, and I said this on a show the other day, is that this is effectively manifesting in voter suppression of another type. Because we have election officials that are getting drummed out of the workforce. We have historical levels of openings and open headcount, FTEs, in these roles. And so what does that mean when you have fewer people to man the polls, to work the polls? You're not going to have as many polls open. You're not going to have as many opportunities to participate in democracy. So I personally find one of the biggest threats right now is the constant harassment of of election officials. Now, there's kind of a knock-on effect here that we are seeing some folks that are filling these positions. Many of them are of the right inclination and motivation, incentives to take those jobs. Others are not. And we are now seeing, I think, a greater level of insider risk to elections from those that may be pursuing that role for ideological purposes. So, as I always felt that the technical issues around elections and election security, it was simply an engineering problem. You address the vulnerabilities, you upgrade systems, they're imminently fixable. But all these other human-driven issues are much, much harder and take a broader set of people. And it's not about how much money the federal government can throw in grant dollars and how quickly you can put it on contract at the state or local level. And so we have a range of challenges here, and I'll let Bryson finish before I interrupt him again. But again, I just want to say thank you to those state and local folks that are out there every day, ensuring that our democracy, that we're able to vote, and this project, this experiment keeps going forward. Back to you.
I mean, to summarize, right, this ties to 2024. The threat is from within. The system is being attacked from within. And that sounds abstract, except for it is people. And I'm pointing because you raised your hand, right? It is people. They are coming to their houses. They're hunting them down. It is personal. Can you imagine being in that situation? I mean, it's like out of a science fiction novel where it sounds, again, sort of, they're being drummed out like you lost a job. They're being harassed at a personal level, and their family is being harassed at a personal level. And here's the thing. Dots are dots, but when there are a lot of them that draw a line, that's a pattern. The system is being attacked from within by a system. There is money being poured into organizing and attacking this. And I know you're seeing that in Europe too. This is part of what you and I were talking about beforehand. There is literally forces aligned that are coming after this. I made the joke to her before. I was like, do you remember when liberal democracy wasn't a question? That's no longer an assumption you can make. There are people that each of you know, I guarantee you, that you have your racist aunt on Facebook. That's why you don't go to Facebook anymore. they don't believe in the system anymore. One other thing, since we're also giving recognition and applause, right? I worked with Chris in 2020, and we tried really hard. I highly recommend pointing to the panel I pulled together. It was the first multiple federal agency panel that had ever come together and publicly talk about everything they'd been doing since 2016. It was DEF CON Voting Village 2020, NSA, Cyber Command, State Department, Election Assistance Commission, CISA, and FBI. Check it out. But the thing I want to really go here is, it is easy to stand up on a stage and say what you would do. It is much harder when you're actually in that system. Chris was a political appointee in 2020 in the Trump administration. And he not only carried with integrity, he showed character and courage to call it out. And I think that also deserves a round of applause. You cannot be recognized enough for that. No, and just on that too, because I mean, you went through a lot. I mean, I was there, I lived right next to him, and I cannot tell you the personal cost there was at that time. That is courage. I'm an Army officer, okay? I've been shot at, I have seen things around this world. That is easier than to stand up against the whole system like you did.
Showing up with a bottle of Yellow Spot helped too. That was much appreciated. So let me kind of, as a moderator, take a little bit of personal privilege here and give you a bit of my view of what we're looking at in 2024. I think you're absolutely right. I think there is a significant threat of the caller is inside the house issue, and I'll come back to that in just a second. But I continue to think that we have significant and grave threats from foreign actors. Yep. I look at motivations, and so this is where strategic intelligence and threat modeling comes in. We know that there are systems that have vulnerabilities out there. The existence of a vulnerability doesn't mean it's been exploited or someone has the capability, of course. But I look at what Putin is thinking right now about his continued war in Ukraine, and how one of the main things, in addition, beyond rather the Ukrainians' resilience and ability to defend themselves, is the West's continued support of Ukraine. And might, if there's someone in the White House, might they pull back that support and that aid, and how would that affect Russia's ability? So what does that mean, and how might they act on that? Might we see more of the continued drumbeat of disinformation that we've seen since the 2014 post-Maidan events in Ukraine? We also could see, I think, more of that, technical mischief. And I'm not one of those that I still think that it is a significant red line to get into an actual process and affect the casting, counting, and certification of the votes. But getting in and mucking up election night reporting to cause panic and chaos, so that conspiracy theories spin out of control about late night dumps or whatever they call it. Like, those are the things that I continue to worry about. Not just from the Russians. I think the Chinese similarly now have capabilities, they have motivations. I think with President Xi's continued eyes towards Taiwan and some of the saber rattling that we're hearing with friction with the West. And then if you look at the Volt Typhoon reporting out of Microsoft about pre-positioning for conflict, I think the natural extension of that is that they may have the ability or desire to get into our democratic processes. All right, bringing it back home, and I'll
Can I just interject real quickly? You don't have to hack a system to undermine confidence in the system.
Yeah.
You don't have to technically compromise something. All you have to do is get people to not believe what it is. That's the threat beyond the technical piece, right?
Yeah.
We have vulnerabilities. I mean, it is amusing, having worked with the voting village for a long time, where it was us constantly hammering the voting machine manufacturers. And now it's like we're kind of on their side, even though there's still problems, because there's this bigger risk we're all facing. Sorry, Kendall.
Yeah, go ahead.
So if you don't mind, I want to take a bit of a different approach and maybe ask a question.
Sure.
Bryson, when I hear you talk, when I hear Chris talk, when I hear you talk, like, you hear so much passion, right? And I think when we start talking about democracy and how to protect it and how to examine the threats and how to promulgate solutions to it, a lot of it has to do with how do you get people to care? And I think one of the interesting questions that I ask, when we're examining different cultures and different nations and how they go about their election process is what are the tools used to sort of protect those systems, and how do you educate, again, the people, younger generations who are going to matriculate and become, positive members of those societies, to care and take democracy into their own hands and say, you know what, damn it, I'm going to work at the polls, and this is my country too, and it is up to me to protect it. And just generationally, we see so much differences there, and I would just love to know a little bit more about what it is that kind of keeps you going, and if it was that civics class that so many of you guys had in a different lens than what I had.
So, this is a complicated question. I've studied.
Didn't mean to throw the.
No. It's a good question. I've taken a look at this, and I don't think I'm going to meet your expectations for an answer here, but with the Aspen Institute and the Commission on Information Disorder, we looked in part at this, and I think one of the common observations is that civics education and opportunities to engage civically have eroded over the last couple decades, and so. You may not have the social studies and civics education in K through 12 that give you the foundational understanding of how the United States came about and what it took to get to this current form of liberal democracy. And I think a reintroduction of that could certainly, I think, go some degree towards achieving that. Bryson?
Yeah, happy to get to both of you actually, because I'm super passionate about it, and indeed it's very important to me. And why? Because I feel it here. And if we think about new technology, if we think about disinformation, but mostly if we think about our future, is coming to us here. And one of the strongest emotions that is being deployed by the bad actors, whether they are the foreign actors or the internal ones, is fear. We are in fear for the past few years. We had pandemic, in Europe we have a war in Ukraine. We have right now AI as one of another emerging fears, which I believe that is actually taking for good, right?
Yep.
And I want other emotions to see there. I want those young kids not to be afraid, but rather want to be passionate about their future, about their EU, about the US, about our world. And when we think about it, and if I may just go back on the China issue, right? We're talking about EU and US and kind of this dimension, there's Russia, but that's not the world we live anymore in. And I think that we also need to realize that, the global situation in the world is changing. The global south is there, it's emerging, and it's heavily deployed by China and by Russia. Africa right now, it's one of the biggest regions being deployed with disinformation. I've been in Kenya talking with the activists in there and the governments because they just had elections last year. And did you hear about the Team Jorge? The Team Jorge is one of the biggest investigations that were made by the more than 30 different media outlets, and it's a company, Israeli company, that was offering the services for 1 million euros to change the elections. Then investigated more than 30 presidential elections all over the world. They said there also was happening in Europe, but they didn't have enough of the details to tell which countries. But that happened, right? The guy of the Jorge, that's how they named it, he's already in the first pages of Der Spiegel and others. But I mean, you know better than I do that it's super easy to just set up the bunch of bots accounts that are looking legitimate. And that's what the bad actors are doing. And they're just giving the hashtags. They're just giving those emotions. They're giving the fears on us. We're going into the internet and we are afraid. And that's why I'm here and why I'm doing all of that.
Bryson, you want to chime in?
This country has a lot of issues, right? You pick your axis. I've been all over the world. The quality of life here is still some of the best you will find anywhere. 2.5 billion people on this planet don't have access to clean water even, right? You want to talk about Maslow's hierarchy or worrying about things? We as Americans, I say you because I actually did grow up here, don't worry about those kinds of things, where the rest of the world does. And so I'll say, I actually, the opposite of the civics lesson, I saw the dark side. I grew up in East Germany in the Soviet Union. You might remember them from your classes as not the beacons of freedom and personal individualism. And so I saw what humanity could be and what could do. And that compelled me to join the Army here in the United States because I wanted to be a patriot. I wanted to believe in a higher purpose. And of course, the military has its own faults too, right? But I'm just saying, I think we take it for granted what we have and what we're fighting for. And so that's my passion, is my whole career has been a sense of service because I lived and grew up where there was nothing.
Just dawned on me. You are what the show The Americans was based on. You're a sleeper agent. I've known you all this time. You've been hiding it.
You can test me by pushing a cup of coffee off and I catch it immediately.
So let me kind of close out the current threats, or at least to 2024, and like I said, bring it back home. One of the things that I'm worried about is that there were lessons learned from 2020 efforts, observing foreign actors doing things, as well as information that's come across and publicly available over the last couple years. And I don't know if Alex is here, Halderman, but I think we may see some ideological lone wolf type actor, hacktivist type person, look at something like Alex's report or other systems and just cause a wobble in the machine. Like, not actually try to change the outcome of an election or overturn anything, but just say, see, look, I told you. See, we told you, and therefore the entire system is not invalid. And those are the sorts of things I think are going to manifest into 1,000 different conspiracy theories that are going to spin out of control. I will say, though, that there is one aspect of social media chaos that might actually tamp down or dampen some of these viral disinformation and conspiracy theories, because they've seemingly kind of sorted out into very narrow ideological spectrums, and you go to one platform because there are people there that share your beliefs. And that's, I think, one of the biggest shames of what's happened, in my view, with Twitter is how it is not that global public square anymore. Now, what that means to me is that we may see conspiracy theories pop up that burn really fast and really hot, but they don't have staying power because they just burn through the population, kind of like Ebola would. And on the other hand, I am worried about TikTok as a very broad platform that can be manipulated, not necessarily just intentionally by the Chinese, but by other actors that can get on there. And that's where you could see a COVID-like disinformation or conspiracy theory, I think, burn very broad and slowly and deeply and corruptively. So those are the sorts of things that I'm worried about. All right, so now we're gonna take a little bit of a leap forward, and since Maia, you broke the seal and talked about generative AI, in DC at least, these are a lot of the questions I'm getting from policymakers. How should we think about the threat of generative AI in disinformation and other means for the 2024 election? So Kendall, we'll start with you, and then we'll work our way down.
So trying to take the lawyer hat off, right? Because one of the things I also do, I'm a cybersecurity and data privacy attorney at a firm in Boston. So part of where I see the issue is it eroding people's motivation to sort of question what they're looking at. We talked earlier about kind of getting people to care, getting people to understand the institutions that they use to actually carry out the democracy. In just, my generation personally that relies heavily on, ChatGPT and that type of thing, people are using it as a means to take certain shortcuts. Which I think down the line, the impact that it's going to have on critical thinking and actually kind of working through some of these tougher issues, I think we're going to see some problems in that space. I think on the legal front, kind of putting the lawyer hat back on, we saw a big issue, I want to say a couple months ago, where you had an attorney that had an entire brief written by ChatGPT and did not look at the cases. They were completely fictitious. That was crazy. And so sort of where I see the issues are just people kind of, again, getting information just kind of handed to them without questioning it. And sort of the second tier of analysis of, here's what I'm getting, does it make sense? And what is this based off of? That's where I see the biggest issue in my opinion. I think when we get back to sort of talking about education a bit, being trained to think logically and question things is not something that comes as a foundational part of today's education, unless you go and pursue engineering or a STEM field, or you end up going to law school. And I'm sure there's, philosophy and some other disciplines will also have that. And I think that causes a very big problem because it makes it easier to divide people. It makes it easier to convince you that what you're seeing is real and true and God's honest truth. And so those are some of the areas that I see problematic, that I see to be kind of problematic down the line. I'm sure there's a host of others, but just that's where I would say my unique view would sort of kind of center on.
All right, Maia?
Yeah, I find, first of all, I'm a fan of AI. I think that it really can do a lot of good things. And that's a thing. We need to start to make it good things and put a lot of money into actually deploying AI onto level of the good tech instead of the bad tech, right? Because that's the approach. Which values are we putting it in? If, as a lot of people are saying, right, AI right now, it's like our babies. So if we're talking about education, that's how we need to educate it as well. If we're programming and making an AI, we need to teach us our values. So if we are a society with fear, we're gonna build the AI with fear as well. And that's not something we want to. So that's one. And the other one is the legislation and basically how we're looking at the future. I believe that one of the biggest challenges we face, also on the political level, is that we are all the time reactive. We are not thinking about the future, what can happen. We are not building scenarios. AI is nothing new. We knew it's going to emerge, and it's going to emerge farther. But only how we are working on it is looking at it, how it looks like right now. I would love to have a group of experts basically sitting together and thinking of what we can do in the future, how we can make AI better, how we can pour better money into it, instead of giving it to the bad actors, because bad actors are also deploying it, right? So.
Got it. Bryson.
Iran. We haven't talked about Iran. First, I would say Iran is the same as Russia in a regional power that's primary strategy is chaos. The reason I'm using Iran as an example tied to artificial intelligence is I remember when Iran first started to try to do disinformation campaigns. They were bad. They were horrible. They were the Nigerian scam email to send $10 million to a prince, because they didn't have the language capabilities built up in the intelligence services to be able to effectively do them. Artificial intelligence removes that. I type in my language, native English spits out on the backside. The second part of this, disinformation and those kinds of campaigns are effectively marketing, which means from a system perspective, the more statistical, data-driven insights I can have, the quicker I can recognize what messages go viral to what populations, and I can have a technographic profile that I can exploit. Well, that can be a machine feeding a machine with looking at that data and doing that, because there's no consequence to getting caught. There's no consequence. We can try to shut things down, but as we've noted, Twitter isn't exactly helping with that. Sorry, X, are we really even calling it that? What the fuck is that? Tying it back into attacks though, so I can now do this at scale. Well, what's the most common initial access vector to hack somebody? Email. Well, email requires a human to look at things, read a language, and decide to do something. We've just solved that problem. That's what AI is doing from a threat perspective.
All right, let's open it up for a couple questions. Saw a hand go up there. You wanna? Hold on. Oh, louder. It is loud in here. All right, let's go here.
All right, thank you. So I really share your concern about poll workers and trust in the process, because if we don't trust the outcome, it doesn't matter if it's right, at the end of the day. And I'm in Vegas, I'm thinking there's processes here where I don't distrust my dealer or the pit boss or the machine, the slot machine, right? Somehow I just figure that's worked out and there's a process. Can we do the same thing for our processes for voting, where the people is like, we have people who are human who may have their own motivations, but we don't care because it's a secure process with insecure people running it. Can we get to the point where I feel comfortable volunteering to be a poll worker because I know there's enough checks and balances and people understand the processes that I don't have to trust you because I know the system works? Is that an approach? And maybe I'm just ignorant and we already have these things and I know that, but we've had these video cameras of people like, look, they're taking boxes under the table or whatever. Can we fix that part so people can trust that?
I think, so I'll give you my view of this first and then let the panel chime in. We can do a lot technically. We can do a lot to shore up vulnerabilities in the system. In fact, as Bryson was talking about earlier, the good work state and local election officials did to roll out more voter verifiable paper audit trails for the 2020 election. So according to the Center for Election Innovation and Research, the 2016 election, it was fewer than 80% of votes cast had a paper ballot associated with it. By the time we hit 2020, due in part to rolling out or getting rid of some of these DRE systems without the sidecar paper, due to the increase in mail-in balloting, it was around 95%. And I think one thing we can do, again, if we are purely approaching this from a technical perspective, is continue to get as close to 100% as we can, understanding that due to accessibility reasons, we'll always have DREs throughout the ecosystem. All that said, there are threat actors on the other side that have incentive structures of power greed, or power, influence, and money that will continue to introduce doubt despite all available evidence. And again, this is what we're talking about happening in 2020. So yes, we can cram down as much as possible on some of the trust issues associated with elections, but there are always going to be bad actors out there that, for one reason or another, are going to take any little, again, wobble in the system and turn that into some fanciful tale that will continue forever.
There always will be, and it's on us actually to make sure that we are louder than them. And that's the main thing, because it's a great question. Like, what is happening in Poland right now is that both opposition and the government that is responsible for the elections on the 15th of October, are saying there are threats for the integrity of the elections. I mean, come on, right? But why they are doing it? Because if they're gonna lose, they may say like, what happened in 2020 in US? And what happened in 2020 in US is that before that, as far as I'm concerned, you were rather having like one thing that no matter whether you're Republican or Democrat, you are trusting within the system. You trust that democracy is working. And even though those machines are working great, right? They were checked, they were hacked or tried to hack, and everything is perfect. The issue is that there is this disinformation spread, and there's not enough proper information to go to people and tell them it is safe, it's trusted. And it's not that something that we should just do a big elaborate, but rather make a simple communication campaigns on making sure and showing that it's trustful.
Just to build on this real quick, one thing that I think we can do is, on your point of StratCom and strategic communications, increase transparency into the process. So some of the stuff that Stephen Richard's been doing in Maricopa County, and I know some of the guys here, opening up the process to the outside, to come view it, to track it, to provide transparency on the process, take away the opportunities for everyone else, set the narrative, and you go drive that. All right.
Yeah, so it's a great point, a great question. Something to kind of keep in mind. Can you guys hear me in the back, by the way? I'm trying to speak a little louder without being, I know, right? Party on the left, yeah. Okay, so I'm gonna try to speak a little louder. One of the things that I try to remind people is that, I can stick 10 of the most brilliant engineering, technical minds in a room and say, how do we fix this problem, right? We've got a lot of that here. Here's what happens. There's always some, pardon my French, there's always some asshole lawyer that says illegal, right? And so part of what we try to work on and try to find our way around is this sort of tethering of protection and freedom with like the legal foundry, you know, like how do we navigate those type of boundaries, right? We have this nasty patchwork privacy system at the state level that makes it really hard, right? Incredibly difficult. And I think part of that is one of the ways that Germany has actually made it at least a little bit easier, because they have taken such an extreme risk-based approach. But here in the States, it's really tough to protect some of these institutions and some of these processes, because so many of the great things that we would want to do would be super illegal, right? And so at the state level and into at the national level as well, trying to figure out, well, what's the best process we can implement to sort of make that smoother. And as we've seen, just trying to get federal privacy rights, it's a very long road ahead.
All right.
But it's cool.
Bryson, you get to close us out here.
Go be a poll worker, volunteer, be a part of the solution, be there at the ground, right? A lot of this is high-level stuff. Go get your hands in it. See it for yourself. Then tying that back to government is accountable to you, and that's the transparency and the communication they need to be pushing. And now you're a part of that, because you're seeing it at the bottom and you're seeing it at the top. In 2020, I think we had 93% coverage with the states from the federal level, which we had never had that before, and that was something nobody even knew we were doing that in that kind of collaboration. Then the final piece, which was in Matt's presentation, that's why risk-limited auditing is what it is. We have a data science approach to being able to statistically sample to then be able to show what we learned, and if there is the potential of fraud or abuse, we can prove it, and we can understand the extent of it, because just because something is slightly broken doesn't mean the whole system is.
All right, folks, I think that's it. I apologize that we don't have more time for questions. Please send your complaints to whoever decided to name this place Caesar's Forum.
Thank you.